And Moses said, "Today you have been ordained for the service of the Lord, each one at the cost of his son and of his brother, so that you might bestow a blessing upon you this day." So Moses returned to the Lord and said, "Alas, this people has sinned a great sin. They have made for themselves gods of gold. But the Lord said to Moses, "Whoever has sinned against me, I will blot out of my book." Let's read together. Then the Lord sent a plague on the people because they made the calf, the one that Aaron made. This is the word of God. You may be seated. A multifaceted story. It's a story that has many aspects, sides, and faces. The more we peel out those facets, the more we see what is really going on in and out, to and fro of the narrative. For example, I have one older brother. Growing up, me and my brother didn't get along well. We were two different species. Having said that, I just didn't really get why he was always complacent and slow. Later in life, though, I realized that perhaps I was the one who caused him, or even at least as a factor for him to be that way. I was a trophy kid and a golden goose to my parents. I got all the attention from them. So he always felt like an underdog, defeated, forgotten. There's more story to it, but you get the idea. Multifaceted story. Just by highlighting the one side, you won't do just. The story of the golden calf was like that. Last week, we talked about the stiff-necked people and their motives behind the idolatry. But as the story unfolds with multiple facets, we see how God is sovereignly leading his people into the land he spoke to Moses. So last week, we looked at the Israelites' rebellion and apostasy by making a golden calf as an idol and worshiping it. Behind their actions, there were motives. First, they did not trust God, who has time in his hand. While they thought God and Moses were delaying and went ahead, God's verdict was they have turned aside quickly out of the way that I have commanded them. Second, they offered their gold that were supposed to go to offered to God, and instead they fashioned it a figure of a young bull. This was a straight betrayal and disloyalty toward the covenant, a stipulation of the covenant. They were not to have any other gods beside the Lord Yahweh, and were prohibited from making for themselves carved an image of the deity. But it only took 40 days, less than 40 days, because Moses came down in 40 days and already saw this was happening. So for God's people to abandon God didn't even take 40 days. The irony of and the twist of this story was that they thought they were worshiping Yahweh. This idolatry then was coming from arrogance and naivety of God's people, thinking to themselves they could somehow control God. Oppressing and imposing their prejudice and preoccupied concepts on God resulted in them becoming like Pharaoh, from whom they so badly wanted to escape. Behold, it is stiff-necked people. That's what God said. And today, I want to share the unfolding story with other facets to it. For time's sake, we only read the end of chapter 32, but if you have the Bible with you, please open Exodus 32 and follow along, if you will. The story entails their sin and idolatry entail consequences, and how it leaves marks behind, it leaves scars behind. Sin entails its consequences and leaves scars. Verse 19 says this. And as soon as Moses came near the camp, he saw the calf and dancing. Moses' anger burned hot, and he threw the tablets out of his hands and broke them at the foot of the mountain. Tablets that inscribed the covenants between God and his people are shattered. It symbolized the annulment of the covenant since its most fundamental condition has been violated. Just like any other relationships or contract, when its stipulation and its trust is violated, it is no good. The very foundation that God's people were about to enter, they lost that privilege. It's shattered dream. No more communing with God. See, when we sin, we lose this very simple but essential part of us, our relationship with God. Second, verse 20, it reads, Moses took the calf that people had made, and burned it with fire and ground it to powder and scattered it on the water and made the people of Israel drink it. What is going on here? What Moses did is a bit strange and odd to us, especially after he pleaded with God on behalf of this people right before he came down from the mountain. But see how the verbs were used here. Moses took it away from people, took the golden calf away from people. He burned it and ground it in powder. He scattered it with water. See, remember how golden calf was made last week? Aaron mimicked the Creator in Genesis 1. Then what Moses is doing is decreation. Decreating golden calf into dust. He's animating and demonstrating that anything we fashion and adore so much that we worship is nothing more than a speck of dust. People had to drink it. From their mouth to gullets to guts, they had to experience what they worshipped were mere excrement. You see, when God deals with sin and idolatry, He takes it away from us. He decreates it and demolishes it. And in the process, we're not merely standing and watching as if we have nothing to do with it. But we experience how this excrement is going through our system, affecting every corner of our body, lives, and relationships. And it doesn't end there. See, the passage we read this morning, when Moses saw this people, they had broken loose. They were running wild. Then Moses called, "Who is on the Lord's side? Come to me." The Levites gathered around him. Moses ordered them to put their swords on their sides, going from gate to gate and killing their brothers, friends, and close relatives. This is another awkward and predicament passage. How do you make sense of this massacre? Yet, these Levites who did not lose their mind and still on the Lord's side, they needed to make decisions, and it's not going to be the easy one. They had to cut off the people they were associating just a few days ago. So, when God deals with sin and idolatry in our lives, He cuts off any associations we have with them. You can't linger with them. You can't putter around them. The more severe it is, the more intimate and close you have with this, God will call you one day and charge you to end it. Stop it. Purge it. Cleanse it. The tighter, the more intimate relationships you have with this, the more hurtful and painful it will be. And finally, Yahweh Himself, He sent a plague. Literally it means He smote the people. He struck His people. He afflicted His people. When God deals with sin and idolatry in us, if it's needed, God Himself will afflict us. If it is cause to bring His people back to God, if it is what it takes for His people to return to this true God and worship Him only, He will do so. And now I wish someone had told me much earlier in my life. Because there's time when I lived in debaucheries, following my passions without discretion. Had anyone said, the deeper ends I go, I will come out with deeper wounds and consequences, I might have had changed my course of life much earlier. Although things in the past are in the past indeed. However, the sin that affected and influenced me for all those years, I still have to live with the consequences and scars. And on the contingent note, Israel's sin did not just impinge on those who sinned. Their sin and idolatry affected even the ones who did not participate in it. What does it mean? Think about how deep the trauma and the brokenness of the Levites who had to kill their friends, neighbors, siblings, and relatives. The idolatry of Israelites left the scars in their beloved ones, their close ones. Now, I want to share two stories. When I came to the States, I was a minor, so I had to live with American family. And soon I realized, after I got there, my host father was abusive and alcoholic. When he was living as an abuser and alcoholic, his behavior, language, and course of life brought every single member of the house down to the hellbound. My sister, God have mercy on her, even after her father had gone out of her picture, she lived in a suicidal tendency. See, she cuts herself because the trauma and hurt inside screams at her every day. It hunts her down. She had to escape from it, and found the cutting herself was the easiest way out. She's living in the reality that she did not commit, but happened to be in that. I have my friend from college, and he struggled with pornography. No one knew because he was the most charismatic and influential. He was a hotshot on the campus. I remember a year into his marriage, he came to me and said, "Daniel, I thought the marriage was the way out. But now I see that it is no longer my problem, but it is me and Sarah's." My friends, if there's anything in our lives, even the minute and piddling sin and idols, don't let it run wild. Don't let it snowball into your life and relationships, because it will end up consuming you and your loved ones. Let this story of Israel set as an alarm before you. Sin has its consequences and leaves scars. Return, my friend, lest you and your kindred have to pay the unbearable cost. Before we move on to the next facet, let's take a moment to pause. Are there sins and idols in our lives? Aren't we letting it running wild? Are there any uncontrollable behavior, thoughts, and words? Lord, have mercy on us. Christ, have mercy on us. Lord, have mercy on us. But there is other facet of this story. When the Israelites thought they were only in ruin, behind the curtain, there was another fold of the story. Earlier we thought that Moses was gone crazy for making a mixture of gold with ashes and water to make people to drink it, and ordering a massacre of his people. But this very same Moses, no. The sin of this people was so great that they had to face these unavoidable consequences. Yet Moses was there to intercede for them. See, these Israelites had this unaware hope, undeserving hope. Listen to what verse 10 said. Now therefore, this is God talking to Moses. Now therefore, let me alone, that my wrath may burn hot against this people then, and I may consume them, in order that I may make a great nation of you. God had enough. He was going to completely wipe out the Israelites. Even in verse 7, he says, "And the Lord said to Moses, go down, for your people, Moses, whom you brought up out of the land of Egypt, have corrupted themselves." See, even at the beginning of the conversation, God disassociated himself from the Israelites. But what happens? Moses implored, verses 11 to 13. Moses implored based on Yahweh's reputation and his promise to his ancestors. Even though the covenant they made at Mount Sinai, earlier chapter 20, is shattered dream, he remembered who God was. He was a God who said, "I will be who I will be." He was a God who appeared to Moses at the burning bush and promised to bring his people out of the land of Egypt, to bring them and make them into people who worship him only. Moses also mentioned that God's promise to his ancestors much earlier. He knew that God could not be untrue to what he had promised. And we also see that at the end of chapter 32, verses 31 to 33, Moses interceded on behalf of the Israelites. He says, if you are not to forgive them, blot out my name from the book. See, behind the scenes, Moses literally threw his life in this betting. God's offer to make a great nation of him, he counter-offered to exterminate his name from the book if God was not going to forgive them. And that was to their surprise. That was what Yahweh God sought all along. A man who can risk his life for what is right. A man who throws his life in danger to save many. A person who shouts for justice and mercy, who is interceding for both parties. A peacemaker who calms the rage and madness. My friend, let's not just sit and cry at the bottom of our condition and states. In this facet, in this movement, God is perhaps seeking people like Moses to rise and restore those who still in sin and idolatry. And in our case, like Moses interceded for Israelites, Bible says that Jesus is interceding for us. Romans 8:34, who is to condemn? Christ Jesus is the one who died. More than that, who was raised, who is at the right hand of God, who indeed is interceding for us, present tense. Hebrews 7:25, consequently, Christ is able to save to the uttermost those who draw near to God through him, since he always lives to make intercession for them. Another present tense. Maybe you are seeing the end of yourself, my friend. Maybe you think you don't have any strength left to fight this good fight. Maybe you think there is no way to get out. Maybe you are seeing all the scars and consequences of sin that you didn't even commit, but you happened to be in the picture and the narrative. Let's all start from this facet. Because Jesus is interceding even now, at this moment, for us, for you and I. So we saw on one hand how sin affects and leaves scars behind in our lives. On the other hand, we also saw that Moses interceded between God and his people behind the curtain. So what? Do we just mentally exercise accepting Christ's work and call it a day? As our concluding thought, I want to offer one last facet of the story. In verse 34, it says, but now go. It's God talking to Moses. But now go, lead the people to the place about which I have spoken to you. Behold, my angel shall go before you. While there are still the consequences of sin, in fact, momentously pronouncing the upcoming verdict, God says to Moses to lead this people. The journey must go on, my friend. Within few days, many things happened and people are in despair. We lost hope and dreams. Yet they are still called to walk the walk unto the land that God has called them. But isn't it comforting that God no longer calls them your people? They are the people that God is bringing into a new land. They are still the people we saw last week, a stiff-necked people. But God is still their God. Even when we are becoming harsh-necked people, God is still our God. And behold, my angel shall go before them. Behold, my angel shall go before them. At the beginning of chapter 32, when they made a golden calf, they demanded Aaron, make us a God who shall go before us. But at the end of chapter 32, it ends with God's angel going before them. This evokes the story back in Genesis 28. One of their ancestors, Jacob, when he was fleeing from his brother Esau after stealing. What did he steal? Jacob thought he could get what he wanted if he got the birthright and the blessings from his fathers. And he got them. He achieved them with the wrong way. He wronged his family. As a consequence, he had to run away from his mad brother Esau to save his life. He lost everything, went near Haran. No hospitality was for him in town. Nowhere could he find to lay his head but the stone. He's in his dark night of the soul. But then it says, behold, the angels of God were ascending and descending on the ladder which connects the heaven and the earth. And the verses 13 to 15 reads this. And behold, the Lord stood above it and said, I am the Lord, the God of Abraham your father, and the God of Isaac. The land on which you lie, I will give to you and to your offspring. Your offspring shall be like dust of the earth, and you shall spread abroad to the west and to the east, and to the north and to the south. And in you and your offspring shall all the families of the earth be blessed. Behold, I am with you and will keep you wherever you go, and will bring you back to this land. For I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you. Even at the bottom of hell he was in, no matter how broken, lost, forgotten, and unwelcomed he was, what God promised was this: I am with you, and I will keep you wherever you go. I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you. So life goes on. Let's rise to pray. My friend, sin brings consequences to our lives. Sin leaves scars behind. However, just as we sang, God's mercy is more. His mercy is more. His will for us is not just to remain in sin and just get done with it someday. No, He calls us to be the people who point others to justice and mercy. He calls us to be the people who pray for others who are still in hellbound. Even with the consequences and scars we have, God can redeem it into something beautiful. Don't you see that in Moses' own life? Most of all, my friend, God is with us. No matter wherever you are at, you can count on this promise. And let's start from there. Let's recognize God's holy presence within us. Hold on to this promise that He will not leave you nor forsake you. Let's pray.